It is the morning of June 27, 1915. A train slows at a tiny station called Newman, New Mexico. Wind, dust, a wooden platform, 25 miles of open desert between here and El Paso. An old man steps down. He wears a dark suit and small round glasses. He is not hiding. He is waiting for a car to carry him toward the border. That old man had once ruled Mexico. He had sat in the president's chair in Mexico City, commanded its army, signed its orders. Now he had no country, no office, and no army. And he was about to try to start a war, not between his enemies, but between two nations that had no wish to fight each other at all. One of them was the United States. This is the story of how a deposed dictator, thrown out of his own country, spent the last year of his life trying to set Mexico and the United States at each other's throats. Who put up the money? Why a government an ocean away wanted American blood spilled on its southern border? How close it came to working? And how it ended, in the dust, at a railroad stop most people have never heard of. Here is the question that hangs over all of it. If the plan had worked, if that car had reached the border one day sooner, how many men would have died for one man's ruined pride, and a war that no one in America or Mexico ever asked for? Chapter 1: The Man and the Wound. To understand why an old man stood on that platform, you have to go back and meet him when he still had everything. His name was Victoriano Huerta. He was born in the hills of Jalisco, in western Mexico, around 1850, poor, his father of mixed blood, his mother from the Huichol, an indigenous people of the mountains. He was clever with numbers and hard as rock. The army took him in, trained him as an engineer, and made him a soldier. He fought in the country's wars for 30 years and rose to general. He was known for two things: he won, and he drank. By 1913, Mexico was tearing itself apart. A gentle reformer named Francisco Madero had won the presidency and the love of the people. Madero trusted Huerta to protect him. That trust was a mistake. In February 1913, over 10 days of gunfire in the capital, Mexicans still call it the 10 tragic days, Huerta turned on the man he was sworn to defend. He cut a deal with Madero's enemies, and part of that deal was struck inside the United States Embassy, with the American ambassador, Henry Lane Wilson, in the room. Madero was arrested. Days later, he was dead, the government said, during an escape that almost no one believed. Huerta took the president's chair. He ruled by fear. Newspapers were shut. Opponents vanished. Congressmen were dragged from their beds. For about 17 months, he was the most powerful man in Mexico. Then, it came apart. A new American president, Woodrow Wilson, a different Wilson, no relation to the ambassador, refused to recognize him. He would not deal with a government born of murder. In April 1914, American troops landed at the port of Veracruz and seized the city. Huerta's army could not push them out. To the north and south, rebel armies rose. Pancho Villa in the deserts, Venustiano Carranza's forces across the country. In June 1914, Villa smashed Huerta's army at Zacatecas. The war was lost. On July 15, 1914, Huerta resigned and fled to the coast. And here is a detail worth holding on to. The ship that carried him away was not Mexican, and it was not American. It was a German warship, the cruiser Dresden, that took him out of the country and into exile. Remember that ship? Germany was already watching him. He landed first in Jamaica, then England, then Spain. He settled in Barcelona, with a fat pension in his pocket and rage in his chest. He was past 60. He had been a general, a president, a dictator. Now he was a guest in other men's countries, reading old newspapers, watching Mexico burn without him from 3,000 miles away. Most men at that point would have stayed, grown old, died in bed by the sea. Huerta was not most men. He wanted his country back, and he had begun to believe he could take it. All he needed was money, guns, and a reason for the world to look the other way. In the winter of 1915, A stranger came to see him in Spain, a tall German with an easy manner and a soldier's eyes. He had a proposal, and it would change everything. 2 months later, on April 12, 1915, a Spanish steamer docked in New York Harbor. Down the gangway came the deposed dictator of Mexico onto American soil, smiling for the reporters, a man his own country had thrown out, walking freely into the nation he was already planning to bleed. Someone had paid for that ticket, and that someone wanted a war. Chapter 2: The Offer. The tall German who came to Barcelona had a name, Franz von Rintelen. He was a naval officer, about 38, fluent in English, comfortable in America, and very good at his real work, which was secret. He was a spy. By 1915, Europe was a year into the First World War. Germany was fighting Britain, France, and Russia all at once, and it was bleeding. Across the Atlantic, the United States called itself neutral, but American factories were selling guns, shells, and supplies to Germany's enemies by the shipload. Every week, more American-made weapons crossed the ocean and killed more German soldiers. Germany needed that to stop. And someone in Berlin had an idea. If the United States could be pulled into a crisis of its own, a war on its own border, with Mexico, then American guns and American attention would turn south instead of east. American factories would arm American soldiers, not British ones. A war between Mexico and the United States would not help Germany win in Europe directly, but it would tie America's hands, and that was worth a great deal. There was only one problem. Mexico had no reason to attack the United States, and the United States had no wish to invade Mexico again after Veracruz. You cannot start a war between two countries that don't want one, unless you find a man who does. That man was sitting in Barcelona, nursing his rage. Huerta wanted his country back. Germany wanted chaos on America's doorstep. Their goals were not the same, but they pointed in the same direction, and where they met, a bargain was struck. The terms were extraordinary. German agents deposited nearly $900,000 into bank accounts to fund Huerta's return. In today's money, that is close to $30 million. On top of the cash, Germany promised weapons, 10,000 rifles and 11 million rounds of ammunition, to be delivered by submarine to the Mexican coast the moment Huerta was ready to move. Stop and picture that. A foreign empire, at war on another continent, quietly handing a broken exile a fortune and an arsenal to light a fire on the southern edge of the United States. But Huerta could not do it alone. He needed a soldier who could raise men in the borderlands, and he had one in mind. Pascual Orozco, a hard revolutionary fighter who had once been Huerta's enemy and was now his partner. Around them gathered a circle of Mexican exiles in Texas, old generals, wealthy backers, men who had lost everything when Huerta fell and wanted it back. Their plan was bigger than a coup. According to records held today at the Library of Congress, the conspirators talked openly of taking back land the United States had seized from Mexico almost 70 years before, Texas, and the territory won in the War of 1848. This was not only about one man's chair in Mexico City. It carried the seed of a border war, and everyone in the room knew it. Huerta crossed the ocean and settled into a comfortable mansion in Forest Hills, in New York, playing the part of a retired gentleman in exile. He met his backers, he counted his money, he set a date. The invasion would begin on June 28, 1915. Orozco would raise the fighters, the German guns would come by sea, and Huerta would ride back into Mexico at the head of an army, with an empire's fortune behind him. Everything was ready. The money was in the banks. The date was on the calendar. What Huerta did not know was that from the day he stepped off that ship in New York, other men had been watching him, reading his mail, following his friends, and waiting. Well, Chapter 3, How Close It Came. The watchers were real, and we will come back to them. But first, understand this. Even with eyes on him, Huerta's plan came far closer to working than almost anyone remembers today. Look at Mexico in the spring of 1915. The revolution that had thrown Huerta out had turned on itself. The men who beat him, Villa and Carranza, were now killing each other. Just weeks before Huerta made his move, Villa's army had been shattered in battle and thrown into retreat. The country was exhausted, splintered, bleeding from every side. It was a nation with its guard down. Historians who have studied this moment say it plainly. If Huerta had reached Mexico in June 1915, his chances were good. Old soldiers from his federal army were scattered across the north, waiting for a leader. Whole units of Villa's beaten men might have changed sides for a strong hand and a full paymaster. Huerta had both, and the machine was already turning. In the borderlands, Orozco's agents moved quietly, gathering fighters, spreading word, stirring unrest across the state of Chihuahua. Money flowed out of the New York banks. Along the Texas line, in El Paso and the small desert towns, a network of exiles waited for the signal. The pieces even had a place to meet. Huerta and Orozco meant to link up just north of the line, then slip into Mexico together at a quiet river spot called Bosque Bonito, near the Texas town of Sierra Blanca. From there, the plan ran downhill fast. Gather the fighters, land the German rifles, march. The whole thing was set to begin on June 28th. Huerta only had to reach the border by then. On June 24, 1915, he walked out of his New York life. He boarded a train and told reporters he was off to see the World's Fair in San Francisco. A pleasant trip, nothing more. It was a lie. Somewhere along the route, the old dictator's train turned south, toward the border, toward Orozco, toward the arsenal waiting at sea. If you had watched him board that train, you would have seen a stout old man in glasses, going on holiday. You would not have seen an invasion. That is how close it came. Not a wild dream. A funded, armed, timed operation, run by a former head of state, backed by an empire, aimed at the softest moment in Mexico's collapse. A few clean days, and there might have been fighting on the Rio Grande. And once blood is spilled on a border, no one controls what comes next. Here is where I will stop and tell you what I think. I think Huerta was the most dangerous kind of man there is, one with nothing left to lose and a wound where his pride used to be. He was willing to set two nations on fire just to sit in a chair again. But Germany is the colder villain in this story. Berlin did not care about Mexico, or Huerta, or the men who would have died in the desert. It looked at a bitter old man and saw a match to be struck, and it paid to strike him. So here's the question, and people will land on both sides of it. Who carries the greater blame, the exile who lit the fire for his own vanity, or the foreign power that handed him the torch and walked away? Tell me in the comments where you come down and why. Now, back to the desert. Because while Huerta's train rolled south with its secret, other men were already reading the route. They knew he was not going to San Francisco. They knew where that train was really headed, and they had decided to be standing on the platform when it stopped. Chapter 4. The Unraveling. They were standing on the platform. To understand how, you have to know that Huerta was never as invisible as he believed. From the day he sailed for New York, warnings had poured into the American government. Mexico's new rulers, who wanted him caged or dead, sent protest after protest to Washington. German activity inside the United States was drawing more attention by the month, and the Justice Department, the arm of the American government that enforces its laws, had its eyes open on the old dictator and the men around him. They watched his money, they watched his visitors, they followed Orozco, who had already been arrested once that June and had slipped away. And when Huerta's train left New York for a vacation that bent steadily southward, agents understood exactly what it meant. A former president of Mexico does not ride to the Texas border for the scenery. So, they moved. On the morning of June 27, 1915, Huerta's train stopped at Newman, New Mexico, a speck of a station about 25 miles north of El Paso. Orozco was there to meet him. A car was waiting to carry them the last stretch toward the crossing, where they meant to slip into Mexico and light the fuse the very next day. They never reached the car. A Justice Department agent named Beckman, a United States Marshal, and around 25 soldiers were waiting at the station. They took Huerta and Orozco on the spot, in the dust, before the train had well and truly cooled. No battle, no last stand. The war that Germany had paid for, that an empire's guns were waiting at sea to feed, ended on a wooden platform in the desert without a single shot fired. The charge was plain: conspiracy to violate the neutrality laws of the United States, the laws that forbid launching a war from American soil. They were taken to El Paso and held at Fort Bliss, an army post on the edge of the city, and for a moment, it looked as if it might not hold. Huerta was released on bond, so was Orozco. Both were kept under a loose house arrest, watched but not caged, because the border they wanted was so close. Then, on July 3rd, Orozco ran. He slipped his guards, gathered a few men, and made for Mexico. He did not make it. On August 30th, 1915, an American posse caught Orozco and his companions in the Texas desert and killed them. The soldier who was supposed to raise Huerta's army was dead in the sand of a country not his own. For Huerta, that was the end of the dream, though not yet the end of him. With Orozco gone and the plot in ruins, the authorities canceled his bond and locked him up again. The Empire's guns never left the sea. The rifles were never handed out. The invasion set for June 28th had died a day early, on June 27th, on that platform at Newman. The would-be conqueror of Mexico was now a prisoner in Texas, a sick old man watching the border he never crossed through the bars of an American fort, and that is when his body began to fail him, in a way that, even now, some people refuse to believe was natural. Chapter 5. What it left behind. Some people refuse to believe it was natural, so let's be careful and honest about what actually happened. In the fall of 1915, locked again at Fort Bliss, Huerta fell apart. He had always been a heavy drinker, and in the boredom and shame of his cell, the drinking got worse. His health broke. By late December, his skin had turned yellow with jaundice, a sign of a failing liver. On New Year's Day, 1916, doctors operated and found the truth inside him: cirrhosis, a liver eaten away by decades of alcohol. They operated again 2 days later. It did no good. On January 13, 1916, Victoriano Huerta died in El Paso, Texas. A few miles from the border he had crossed an ocean to reach and never touched. He was buried there, in American ground. Now, the rumor. For years afterward, some claimed that Huerta had not died of drink at all, that American doctors or American agents had poisoned him to be rid of a problem. It is easy to see why the story spread. He was a dangerous man. He died in American custody, and his enemies had every reason to want him gone. But there is no evidence for it. The doctors who opened him up found a diseased liver, not poison. Every serious account of his death points to cirrhosis and the internal bleeding it caused. The poisoning story is exactly that, a story born of suspicion, never once proven. Huerta was almost certainly killed by the same bottle that had been killing him for 30 years, so the man was gone. But look at what he had set in motion, and how little it took. One broken exile, one foreign empire willing to pay, a soldier, a pile of cash, and a promise of guns by submarine. That was nearly enough to put two nations at war who had no quarrel worth dying over. It failed by a single day, and by the quiet work of a few agents who read a train schedule correctly. And here's the part that should make the hair on your neck stand up. Germany did not give up on the idea. Less than 2 years later, in early 1917, the German government sent a secret message, now known as the Zimmermann Telegram. In it, Berlin proposed a deal directly to Mexico's government. Join the war on Germany's side, attack the United States, and when it was over, take back Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. The same dream Huerta's circle had whispered about in 1915, now put in writing by a foreign empire. That telegram was intercepted and decoded. When Americans read it, the fury it caused helped push the United States into the First World War. The very outcome Germany had spent years trying to prevent, it triggered with its own message. Huerta did not live to see it, but the plot he lent his name to was not a strange one-off. it was a first draft. Twice in 2 years, a European power tried to turn Mexico into a weapon aimed at the United States. Once with money and a man, once with a coded telegram. Both times it came closer than comfortable. That is the lesson buried under this story, and it has not aged. A war does not always begin with two angry nations. Sometimes it begins with a handful of people who have nothing left to lose, a quiet source of money, and a plan that only has to work once. In 1915, that plan came down to a train, a car that was waiting, and a platform in the desert where it was stopped. One day, and a few men, away from a very different history.